Hi, my name is Kréga Freyser of Air Syndicate, and this is my partner Kyle Kei-Дэddi Gann of Cal Concepts of California. We're here today to present the video Bodywork Basics and Techniques. In this video, we're going to show you dent repair, emblem removal, as well as key scratch repair and chip repair. Hopefully with these techniques, you'll be able to repair and fix anything that comes into your shop, from Harleys to hot rods. So let's get to it.
Now we'll touch on some of the tools which you'll need in your arsenal to complete some of these bodywork tasks we're going to discuss today. This is a dent puller, a rather big dent puller. It's used for when you can not get to the back of a panel and you need to drill a hole, insert the screw. You use the slide it back, and what that does is it allows you force to pull a dent without actually having to get to the back of the panel. A lot of times you'll have a dent that you're getting paid $200 for, and you can spend 4 or 5 hours ripping out an interior to get to the back of the panel, which doesn't make it cost effective. This is when this tool comes into good use. These are called pull rods. They're used much in the same way. You drill an 1/8" hole in the panel, you insert this, slide it in, and then you can pull the dent out. Now these aren't to be used on old cars because the metal's much thicker. Basically your new cars, and they're basically used on small dings and small dents. You're not going to be fixing a big dent with these. Both these tools are readily available at any, say, Harbor Freight or any basic tool line stores, all the way up to Snap-on trucks. Their prices range from probably $30 up to a couple $100. They're an absolute must if you're going to be doing body work. These are body hammers. They're used to pound dents out from the back of a panel if you can get to it. They're also used when you're pulling dents to kind of shrink the panel so that the dent will stay pulled. A lot of times they're used in conjunction with dollies. Say this is a panel with a dent in it, you'll put the dolly behind the panel, and then you can use the hammer to pound it, and you'll get a straight edge, and it'll help remove the dent and keep it from going too far in. That's a heel dolly, that's an anvil dolly. They have different shapes, different curves. Whatever your application is, you'll know which one to use. This is an air grinder. It's used to rough up the area which you are repairing. If you don't rough up the area, your body filler won't stick to the area, and it'll just make for a bad job. This is regular body filler. I'm sure people have heard it called Bondo. Bondo's a brand name. There's thousands of different kind of body fillers. They're available from your paint store to your automotive store. They all range in probably the $20 range for a gallon. And this is a catalyzed putty. It's used to remove some of the sand scratches that you use the heavier paper to sand down your Bondo. This is used to fill those. It's easier sanding. It's catalyzed. It's basically the same thing as Bondo, but it's a little easier to sand, and it's not necessarily used for big areas. And this is a cheese grater. It's used to shape the Bondo. You use it mostly on bigger dents. These are spreaders. They're used to apply the Bondo and the Evercoat. They're basically just a squeegee to help you apply the body coat in a smooth fashion. These are your basic bodywork tools. I rarely use anything more than this in what we do, even on big jobs, big repairs. They're indispensable. I would say if you're going to do bodywork, you need to get every single one of these. This is the subject we'll be using today. We'll do all our work on this. We'll fix a dent, we'll fix a scratch, we'll weld up a hole, give you a good overview of all those things. It's a friend of ours, Fender. He sent it down from LA, thought he'd get some free work out of us. But all there was is just a little dent. So, I don't know. Key scratches happen all the time. Say somebody got upset with you, took a screwdriver, and did that. Notice whoever did this act went all the way through to the metal. That won't buff out. There's also a small dent here. Come to think of it, this little dent here, it's not really big enough to show you guys. Ooh, that will. Well, now that's what I call a dent. That'll give you a little more idea of what we're doing. Notice the paint chipped off. That's pretty bad. A lot of people would probably just throw this Fender in the trash, but it's our friend Dave, so we're going to fix it. First thing you want to do is let's pick some of this old paint off of here. And all this does is keep this from, when you grind it, from flying around and cutting you and whatever else. Get all the loose stuff off that you can. That's pretty good. Now we're ready to grind it. Always wear safety glasses when you're grinding. This stuff will definitely fly around. I've hooked my air hose to my air grinder. We're using a 24 grit grinding disc. I like 24 grit over 36 because it cuts the paint and really tears it off fast. As you grind, you want to grind a good 1.5 to 2 inches away from your dent. Give yourself plenty of room to work on it. And just grind the whole, all around the whole deal. As you can see, the dent's deep enough where the grinder won't get in and get all the paint out, so we're going to have to pound this out, try to get most of the shape back, and then we'll be able to finish grinding all this. It's really important to have all the metal ground and ground clean so the Bondo will stick to it. Use a table like this, nice flat surface. Use a body hammer. You wouldn't want to use this end because what you're going to do is mimic this shape on the top side if you're banging it. So you want to use a more flatter surface. Try not to really whack it, just work the dent out. And just get in there and... As you can see, we're getting a lot closer to our desired shape. The dent looked a lot worse than it really was. In a matter of seconds, we've got it almost basically the basic shape back in it. So now we'll continue to grind, and we'll see where our highs and lows are. Now, as you can see, where the paint remains, these are low spots still in the metal, and we'll have to work on those a little bit more to try to get the desired shape back in it a little better. And you won't necessarily get all of this out, but the more you get out, the less Bondo you'll use, and the better the repair will be. The minimum amount of Bondo is probably the most desired. You don't want to load it on. A lot of people just cake it in there, and it's just, eventually it's going to crack out. Bondo's recommended no more than 1/4 inch thick. As you can see, I've repeated the process, pounding the dent out from the inside. We've got it real close now. You see some lows, some actual, when you feel it with your hand, you can feel some highs, where I've actually hit the metal out too far. Now what I'll do now is come back with a heel dolly on the inside, and I'll work those high places back down. You have to rely on feel on a lot of this. Looking at it, it might look good in the video, but it's actually still pretty rough, still needs a little bit of finesse work. Take the dolly, the round part pretty much matches the round part of the fender. Put it up underneath anywhere you feel a high spot. Just kind of work it. Work the high spots down. Just using the dolly as a backing so you don't actually knock the metal too far down now. Now we're real close. We'll grind it one more time, kind of even everything out, and then we'll go on to putting on some body filler. There's our finished roughing out of the dent. It's ready for some body filler to be applied to just smooth out our minor highs and lows. We really shouldn't have any Bondo, probably over 1/16 of an inch on this. And the repair will be really good. It'll last forever. Before we get started actually applying the Bondo, I'll show you how to mix Bondo. I use a paint stick, just a standard stir stick to get the Bondo out of the can. You want to try to gauge how much you're going to use and mix, about what you need. I don't think I'll need much more than that. You always want to knead the hardener, make sure it's good and mixed. Then you just, that much for an area about like that is plenty. With the spreader, you'll mix the Bondo. Make sure that the hardener gets in there really good. Make sure you get it evenly mixed. If you don't get it evenly mixed, you'll have areas that won't harden, and they'll either give you headaches now or give you headaches later after the job's done. So make sure it's good and mixed. As you can see, it's a uniform color. There's no hardener left in there. And now what we'll do is apply it to our fender. Get a good dollop on there and just spread it over. Following the contour of the fender, try to get your Bondo on evenly, and we're all set. We want it to dry just starting to get hard, and then we'll go ahead and use a cheese grater to file the shape in. Show you how to use that. So let's let that dry, probably take about 5 minutes, and we'll be ready to roll. Now that the Bondo's starting to harden, you can do a little touch test. Once it stops coming off on your fingers, you really need to pay attention. You want it to be hard, but not totally hard, because you want to work it with a cheese grater. Now this is what I explained earlier. This is used to shape the Bondo. Now what we'll do is we'll start cutting it. They call it a cheese grater because it looks like you're grating cheese. And you just kind of use it to, you want to get your exact contour. Try not to take too much off. Just work it around. Make sure you get all the high spots. I purposely put it on a little heavy so we can cheese grate it and get a nice contour out of it without having to apply multiple layers. Okay, now that we have our basic shape, you can see that shaping up real nice. You almost wouldn't know there was a big dent there. We'll let it dry actually a little more, get really hard. We'll come back and I'll show you some of the sandpapers and blocks that we use to continue to shape this. Now that we've got this far, I'll take some time out to show you some sanding tools and some sandpaper that's used in almost every type of bodywork. All of these sanding blocks can be purchased at any hardware store, any paint store. They're fairly reasonable in price, and they're indispensable when it comes to doing this type of work. What we have here is just it's a 6-inch rubber sanding block. Like I said, they're available at any hardware store. You move up to a 9-inch block. This is used on a bigger area. What we're doing today, we'll use probably just a 6-inch. But the 9-inch block is used for a larger area where you're needing to get a flatter surface. And then finally you have a longboard, a 12-inch block, which is used when you're fixing, say, a side swipe on a car door or something of that nature. Something with a real flat panel that needs to be real flat. This is what you'll use to keep it from getting wavy. We have two different kinds of sandpaper. We have 36 grit, which is used directly after what we did just now with the cheese grating. This is real heavy paper, and it helps to rough it up and get your contours exactly right. And then we have 80 grit, which we'll use to smooth out the 36 grit scratches. On our Harley fender, we'll use the 6-inch block, like I said. What you'll do, we're going to use the 36 grit sanding paper. You need to fold it in half. These are 12-inch sheets, and they give you 6 inches when you fold it in half. Rip it. It's got a backing which is sticky. Pull that off. Fold your block up, insert the paper. There's some little pins in there, so you push it, and that secures the paper. You want the paper nice and tight on the block, so pull it, stick it down as you go, and do the same thing on the other side. Pull it in, and push it down so those pins go through the paper. You would do the same process on a 9-inch block and a 12-inch block. It's important to keep the block nice and flat. You don't want to dig in like this, because what you're going to do is cause a low spot. So you want to keep it nice and flat. Don't press real hard. Let the block work for you. Just go with the contour. It's not important to get all these thick scratches out yet. If we need to, we can apply another coat of Bondo to fill those. We just want to get our basic shape. And just let the block work for you, keeping it nice and flat. It doesn't take much pressure. You don't have to push real hard. It's good to go crossways across the piece, so you're not going through the middle and causing a low center spot here. You want to go crossways, and then we'll come back and cross back this way to give it a good even surface. Like I said, we'll cross back the other way. What this does is, if we were causing any low spots going back the other way, we'll correct them this way. It's actually pretty nice. Now, if we had some high spots when we're sanding this, we'd start to see some metal. This is right on a corner, so this probably isn't necessarily high. But if we had some metal showing here in the middle, we would know that the metal's high there. So we would need to take the body hammer and tap in the metal a little bit, and then we could apply another coat. This will need another coat. We'll put it on in a thinner layer, and then we'll skip the cheese grade part because we have our basic shape, and we'll just work it with some 36 and get a nice even surface there. Okay, so now that we've got this far, we're going to need to put another coat on there. Just repeat the process as last time. Make sure you get the Bondo good and mixed up. Get all the hardener streaks out of it. Make sure it's nice and uniform. One other thing is you don't ever want to put this hardened material back in the can. Once you hardened it, it's done. That's it. If you don't use it, it's wasted. So don't ever put it back in the can or to harden up your whole gallon. So now that we have it like this time we're going to go to a lot thinner coat because we've almost got our shape. We're really close now. So you just add a little more pressure to the spreader. And what we're going to do is try to fill in some of these areas that we don't have much filler on. And just really press down so we can get that good contour. That looks pretty good. This time we'll allow this to harden up real good and solid because we're not going to be cheese grating. We'll be only sanding. So we want it good and solid. We'll sand it. Won't take much. And then we'll come back with some Evercoat to fill our 36 grit scratches, and we'll move on to the 80 grit paper. Now that our Bondo's good and dry, we're ready to sand again with the 36 grit paper like we did before. This time we have a nice thin coat, so we're not going to be getting too crazy when we sand it. One of the biggest mistakes for somebody that's new at bodywork is trying to sand too much of the filler off. You just want to sand it enough to where when you run your hand over it, you don't feel any gross bumps or anything in it. You just want to have a nice contour. Don't sand it too much. Get it to where you like it and then stop. So we'll go ahead and get going. Same way, we'll go crossways this way and then we'll cross back. Give us a nice uniform finish. Again, you don't want to press real hard. Just let the block work for you. Keeping it flat. Got a nice contour. Running your hand across it, you don't feel any bumps, any waves. That's what we're looking for. We'll cross back this way. Now that we've sanded the Bondo with 36 grit, it's nice and smooth. We've got a nice contour. Problem is we have some really deep gouges from the paper. We'll go over with 80 grit, which is a finer paper. The higher the number on the paper, the finer the paper is. So as we move on, we'll keep getting higher and higher in paper and get a smoother finish, and eventually we'll be ready for paint. Basically, you do the exact same thing you did with the 36. We'll cross this way. And this time we have our contour, so it's really important. You don't want to push really hard. You just want to let the block work. We're just getting rid of some of the real heavy scratches. Same thing, cross both ways. This keeps from getting any grooves in it as we're sanding. And as you can see, a lot of the 36 grit scratches are gone. There's still plenty there. Now that we've got the Bondo sanded with the 80 grit to smooth out some of our 36 grit scratches, we'll move on to using some Evercoat glazing putty. This is basically used, it'll be used when we fix a scratch on the side of the fender. It's used for minor bodywork, not necessarily for dents. Small dings, it's okay, but it's basically used to follow up on top of Bondo to fill up scratches. You mix it basically the same way as you do the Bondo, add a little hardener, you use the same spreader. This stuff is basically applied very thin. You don't want to put this on real thick. Get it mixed good and smooth, get all the hardener mixed in good with filler so we don't have any problems later. Now that we're ready, we'll put a nice, very thin, smooth coat. Notice how much smoother this goes on than the Bondo. It sands a lot easier than Bondo also. You never have to sand this with 36 grit, only 80. And it does tend to dry a little faster than Bondo. So if you're in a really hot climate, you might want to mix just a little bit less hardener to give you a little longer working time. And there we have it. Nice, smooth, even coat. Won't take much sanding at all to smooth that out. And we've got that dent fixed. Now that our Evercoat's good and dry, we're going to sand it with 80 grit paper, following the same procedures as we did before, going crossways both directions, and keeping a light pressure on the block. Once we get it smooth, We'll cross back the other direction, make sure we have no highs and lows. At this point, that's ready for primer. Now that we're ready to fix the scratch in the fender, I'll show you another tool. This is called a DA sander. DA stands for dual action because the pad spins this way and it also spins this way. It's used to feather out the scratch, get the rough edges out of the scratch so we can actually fill it. I'm using an 80 grit sandpaper. It comes on a roll. It's sticky back. All it does is just stick to the pad on the DA. This could be done by hand, but the DA will save you a whole lot of time. They range from probably 100 to 250. Okay, using our DA, like I said, we'll get rid of the rough edges on the scratch so we can prepare it to fill it. Okay, now that we're done sanding that, basically what we're trying to do is just take the rough edge off of the scratch. If we tried to fill it with that rough edge, that edge would peek through and you would see it when the repair is finished. When using the sander, you don't want to really gouge into it. All you're trying to do is just get a nice smooth edge. You can definitely feel it. It's like a small dent when you run your hand across it. But now what we'll do is we'll fill it with some Evercoat and get that back up to the same height as the rest of the fender, block it down. But before we do that, I'll show you how, if you don't have a DA, you can use a block and basically do the same thing. You're just going to spend a lot more time. See, we've basically achieved the same thing by using the block. It's good to sand a good far edge around it. That'll give us plenty of area for the Evercoat to stick. Without that being roughed up, the Evercoat would just flake off as we sanded it. So now we'll move on to filling this and blocking this the same way we did the top. As I've shown you before, we're going to go ahead and mix some Evercoat. Same stuff we used on the top of the fender. Small amount of hardener like I showed you before. All I use is just all these are that I'm mixing it on is just some old cardboard. That works the best. You can just throw it out. They make plastic Bondo boards, but they're more expensive, and basically you don't get a whole bunch of use out of them before they have to be thrown out too. So once again, we'll just mix the hardener in really good. Get rid of all that streakiness. Make sure everything's good and mixed so we don't have any problems later. And you want to apply it, you know, a good amount over, get a good bit in the groove to kind of fill it. And then we'll come back over it and kind of using the outside here, that's the right height as a guide, we can smooth it out. And that's about it. While we're allowing our scratch repair to dry, I'm going to go ahead and get started on filling this hole. This hole is pretty much useless on this fender. It doesn't serve any purpose, so the customer wants to get rid of it. What we're going to need to do is grind this using the 24 grit grinding disc like we did on the dent. We'll grind this smooth, get rid of all the paint off of the surface and around the hole. Always wear your safety glasses when grinding. Basically that's good. That's all we need to do. We have a nice smooth surface, bare metal. We'll be able to clamp our ground on here when we weld, so we'll get a good ground, and we'll get going on the welding of it now. In order to weld up our hole, we're going to need to use a MIG welder. This is the one we have at the shop. It's a Lincoln. There's many different brand names of welders, range in price probably from $500 up to thousands of dollars. You don't need anything really big for body work. And this is a 220 model. It runs off 220 current. You can buy models that plug right into a wall socket, run off 110. For doing sheet metal repair and this type of stuff, you're going to have no problems at all with a 110 welder. Basically the components, this is the trigger. This is where the wire comes out. This is what actually does the welding. Squeeze the trigger there and it shoots the wire out. This is the heat control. When you're doing sheet metal work, you want to keep it at a low heat to try to keep the warpage down. This is the wire speed. You don't need a lot of wire. Keep the wire speed pretty low. This welder runs off of like a 220 current, and it has an argon bottle which helps reduce oxidation and keeps your weld cleaner. They make welding models that don't need the argon. You can use a flux core wire, which basically does the same thing, but you have a little less cleaner weld. You have more splatter. But for doing this, it would work fine too. By the way, for more information on welding and welding equipment, your best bet is to go to a local welding supply store. Explain to them what you're doing, and they'll point you to the best unit for your needs. I forgot to mention the ground strap. You have to have a nice clean area on your metal to ground the ground strap. What this does is allow current to go through the piece, which allows you to weld. Usually when I weld a hole, I like to use a nail. It's a normal 16-penny nail. You can get it at any local hardware store. What this does is we'll slide it up through the hole, and it gives you a backing for your welding, so you're not trying to weld just an open spot. It makes it a lot easier. A lot less heat's involved because you're just tacking a piece into the hole. Basically, you want to keep your heat at a minimum when you're welding on sheet metal to keep warpage from happening. Sometimes it warps. There's really nothing you can do about it. If it does, basically what you have is a dent. You have to go back and do what we did on top of the fender to repair that. When welding, always use a welding helmet. This will protect your eyes from the arc of the welder. Will also protect your face from getting skin burns from the welder. If you don't use this, you risk having permanent retina damage and all kinds of health problems because of it. I now have the trigger, and what you do is you want to aim the wire that's coming out of the trigger, pull your nail up, and you want to aim it right at the base of the nail and try to catch the edge of the hole also. This will weld the nail to the fender and it'll dissipate the heat. You want to try to hit the nail first and drag your tack over to the fender. With your helmet in place, you want to get started. Pull the helmet down. Make sure it covers your whole face. This will protect you. Pull your nail up. Start your welding. Shouldn't take more than probably 4 or 5 tacks. While your nail's hot, just wiggle it and break it off. Okay, with our welding complete, it looks a little rough because the head of the nail's still there. What I like to do after I'm done welding is get a wet rag and just quench the spot, and this will help it not warp. You want to dissipate that heat as quick as possible to keep the area from warping. Now that the weld's all nice and cool, we'll grind this flat and we'll go ahead and do the body work on it. Now that we have our weld nice and cool, it's totally cool, I can touch it. I can't stress more that we need to wear safety glasses when grinding. I mean, if you get a piece of metal in your eye, that's it. I have a good buddy that has one eye because of the same exact thing. Always wear your safety glasses. I mean, wear them all the time when you're doing body work, not when you're grinding. Just put them on and wear them all the time. What we want to do is just smooth this out the best we can. We want to get it as flat as possible, and then we're going to come back with a little Evercoat, fill it up, and be just like new. Okay, here we have our finished hole. It's nice and smooth. If you look closely, you'll see some pinholes in there. You can see a little daylight through there. That's no big deal. Bondo will safely fill an 1/8-inch hole, but no bigger. A lot of beginning body workers will try to fill bigger holes. I see it weekly at our shop. They try to fill door handles with Bondo, and basically the Bondo won't hold up. It shrinks and contracts differently than the metal in heat and cold, and basically it will crack and it will look like hell. it'll turn around and bite you every time. It's got to be welded. If you don't have the capabilities of welding it, don't try to half-step it because you'll be redoing it later. Because we don't necessarily have a dent per se, we're just filling back in the paint area. We can use Evercoat on this and just go with the 80 grit. We don't need to use Bondo because we don't have a dent. There's no dent there. We just filled the hole. So we'll do it much like we did the scratch. We'll just fill it in, blending it into the paint a little bit, and there you have it. We'll let that dry, block it with 80, block our scratch with 80, sand the fender, and we'll be ready to primer here shortly. The area we filled with the Evercoat on our scratch here is ready to sand. It's nice and hard. We'll use the same 80 grit paper that we used before on a block. Same way. Let the block work for you. You don't need a whole lot of pressure. Basically feather the edge of the Evercoat into the paint like this. Where you feel it, there's no lumps, no ridges. And this will give us a nice smooth contour when we go to primer it. You don't need a lot of pressure, just let the block do the work for you, keeping it really flat. Now that we've sanded it, what you want to do is just take your hand and rub your hand across it. Your hand will always feel the little highs and low spots. If it feels nice and smooth, if you've kept your block flat, it's going to be smooth. You're not going to have any problem. If you start getting your block and going like this, then you'll have highs and lows. We're back to our nail hole. The putty's good and dry, nice and solid. We'll block this the same way we did the dent and the scratch. 80 grit paper on a 6-inch block. Keep it flat. Work it both directions like we did before. Same way like we did the scratch. Feel your hand across it. Make sure there's no lump. She's good and smooth. We'll sand the fender and get it ready for primer. Now that we have our bodywork pretty much done on the fender, there's so much of it on here that we're going to go ahead and primer the whole fender. We'll need to rough up all these shiny areas. And what we'll do is we'll use 220 DA paper. Same as the 80. It's a sticky paper. This time we won't put it on the DA. We'll just fold it in half and use it by hand. This will just rough it up, give a good tooth for the primer to stick on. We need to get rid of all the shiny, get the whole thing dull, and then we'll move on to primering. Just hold it in your hand. You don't want to hold it on your fingers because you'll create grooves. Just hold it in the palm of your hand and just scuff the fender up. Okay, there we have it. Fender's nice and scuffed up. We have no shiny spots left. This gives a good tooth for the primer to stick to. Otherwise, our primer would want to peel. It's got to be good and scuffed up, no shiny left. Now that we have our fender good and scuffed, no shiny left, we have all our dust and stuff picked up. We've put some regular masking paper down on the table to keep any excess dust from flying up onto our fender when we're primering. Today we're going to use Quick Cure Primer. It's made by House of Color. It's an epoxy primer. Basically, epoxy is a glue, so it will adhere to the fender really well. You mix it 1 part primer to 1 part hardener, 100% to 100%. We'll use this mixing stick, and what it does is has increments, so you can put it in the can and you'll fill the primer up to, if I want to get 3, I'll fill it to 3, I'll fill the next one to 3, and that'll give me an equal amount. I'll go ahead and do that now. I poured some primer off into these cups so it's a little easier for me to pour into the can, so don't get confused by that. And you'll need probably, a quarter of a quart or so to get this done. When we have it mixed evenly, we'll stir it, make sure it's good and mixed. Mix it thoroughly or it won't kick off correctly. Now that our primer's mixed, we're ready to put it in the gun. I've went ahead and turned my exhaust fan on. This will suck some of the overspray out when I begin to primer. Don't rely just on an exhaust fan to keep the particles out of your lungs. You'll always want to wear a respirator. Anytime you do any type of primering or painting, it's very essential to wear this. In the long run, if you don't, eventually you'll pay the price and you'll have all kinds of health problems. Okay, now that I'm done primering, what I'll want to do is apply what we call a guide coat. It's put on with just regular, like a flat black spray paint. And what it does is when you go to sand it to paint it, it lets you know, by the time you sand all the black off, it lets you know that you've sanded enough and you have a nice smooth finished coat. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, I've guide coated the complete surface. As you can see, the guide coat gives you a nice even finish, and when you're sanding, once all the guide coat's gone, you know you've sanded far enough. All we would do now is let this cure for 4 or 5 hours. We'll come back wet and dry with some 400, and it's ready to paint. I won't show you that step because it's redundant of what we've done. Our repairs are finished. Everything's great. We took a pretty wrecked fender and made it brand new again.
This video has given you the foundation of mastering basic bodywork skills and techniques. Bodywork takes a lot of patience and practice, but hopefully with time, the right tools and materials, you'll be able to handle anything that comes into your shop. So for me and Kei-Дэddi at Cal Concepts, we're out of here.